In 1971, a psychological experiment took place that would later become one of the most famous and controversial studies in history. It did not become famous because it failed. It became famous because it revealed how easily human behavior can change under the right conditions. Within a very short time, ordinary people began acting in ways that shocked even the researchers who designed the study. Some participants became controlling and aggressive. Others became passive, anxious, and emotionally overwhelmed. The experiment was supposed to last 2 full weeks. Instead, it was stopped after only 6 days. This is the story of the Stanford Prison Experiment and what it teaches us about power, authority, and the roles we play in society. The study was conducted at Stanford University and was led by psychologist Philip Zimbardo. The main question behind the experiment was simple but powerful. What happens when you place normal people into situations of extreme power imbalance? Do people act cruelly because they are cruel by nature, or does the environment push them to behave that way? To find the answer, Zimbardo and his team recruited volunteers through newspaper advertisements. 24 male college students responded. They were carefully screened through interviews and psychological tests. Only participants who were considered mentally healthy, emotionally stable, and nonviolent were selected. None had a criminal background. None showed signs of psychological disorders. These were not dangerous people. They were ordinary young men. Each participant was paid for taking part in the experiment. Most importantly, they did not choose their roles. By random assignment, some became prisoners. Others became guards. This single decision, made randomly, would shape everything that followed. A mock prison was constructed in the basement of Stanford's psychology department. The goal was to make the environment feel as realistic as possible. Small prison cells were created using temporary walls. Doors were installed. Bars were added. Cameras were placed to record every moment. The prisoners were not told when the experiment would begin. Instead, they were arrested at their homes without warning by real police officers. They were handcuffed, searched, and placed into police cars. This sudden arrest was intentional. It was meant to create confusion, stress, and a feeling of loss of control. After being taken to the mock prison, the prisoners were stripped of their personal belongings. Their clothes were replaced with simple uniforms. Their names were taken away. From that point on, they were referred to only by numbers. The guards, meanwhile, were given uniforms, whistles, and reflective sunglasses. The uniforms symbolized authority. The sunglasses prevented eye contact, making interactions feel less personal. The guards were instructed to maintain order in the prison. They were not told to be cruel. They were not instructed to punish. Physical violence was strictly forbidden. Beyond that, there were very few rules. At the beginning, the experiment felt harmless. Many participants believed they were simply acting in a role-playing exercise. The guards felt uncomfortable giving orders. The prisoners joked and laughed. Everyone understood that this was just a study, but that sense of distance from reality quickly disappeared. As time passed, the uniforms began to change how people behaved. The guards started enforcing rules more firmly. They demanded obedience and discipline. Small punishments were introduced. Prisoners were forced to do push-ups. Sleep was interrupted. Rules were enforced in increasingly humiliating ways. What is important to understand is that none of this behavior was required. The guards were never told to act this way. They simply adapted to their role. The prisoners also began to change. At first, some resisted the authority of the guards, but resistance quickly faded. Many prisoners became submissive. They asked permission for basic needs, such as using the bathroom or getting food. Some stopped questioning orders entirely. By the second day, signs of emotional stress became impossible to ignore. Several prisoners experienced serious psychological distress. They cried uncontrollably. They showed signs of panic and confusion. Some began to feel trapped, even though they knew the experiment was not real. One participant suffered such severe emotional distress that he had to be released early. His breakdown was sudden and intense. What made this situation especially disturbing was how normal it felt to those involved. The guards did not see themselves as cruel people. They believed they were simply doing their duty. The prisoners did not ask why they were obeying. They accepted their situation as if it were real. The roles had completely replaced individual identity. Even Philip Zimbardo himself later admitted that he lost objectivity. Instead of acting as a neutral observer, he became part of the prison system. The experiment was originally planned to last 14 days. It ended after only 6. The reason was clear. The psychological harm was becoming too serious to continue. The boundary between experiment and reality had disappeared. So what does the Stanford Prison Experiment really teach us? It shows that human behavior is deeply influenced by environment and social structure. Personality alone does not determine actions. When people are placed into systems with strong power imbalance, their behavior can change dramatically. One of the most important insights from this experiment is how quickly people stopped seeing each other as individuals. The guards no longer saw students who looked like themselves. They saw prisoners, numbers, roles. Likewise, the prisoners stopped seeing themselves as free individuals. They began to define themselves by their position within the system. This loss of personal identity played a major role in what followed. When identity is reduced to a role, responsibility feels smaller. Actions feel justified. Moral boundaries slowly fade. The experiment showed that people do not always act based on personal values. They often act based on what their role seems to require. Once behavior is framed as part of the system, it becomes easier to disconnect from empathy. No one needed to say, "Be cruel." The structure itself encouraged it. This is why the Stanford Prison Experiment remains so powerful. It did not rely on extreme personalities. It relied on ordinary people placed into an extraordinary structure. Another critical lesson from the experiment is how authority changes perception. The guards believed they had responsibility and therefore control. The prisoners believed they had no control and therefore no voice. This imbalance shaped every interaction. When people believe authority is legitimate, they rarely question it. They assume the system knows better than they do. This is not limited to prisons. The same psychological mechanisms can appear in offices, schools, and governments. Anywhere roles are clearly defined and power is unevenly distributed. The experiment suggests that harmful behavior does not always begin with bad intentions. It often begins with silence, compliance, and acceptance. People follow rules not because they agree with them, but because resisting feels pointless. And over time, that acceptance becomes normal. Power affects how we treat others. Roles affect how we see ourselves. When authority feels legitimate, people stop questioning their actions. This experiment is not only about prisons. It applies to workplaces, schools, governments, and institutions around the world. It explains how ordinary people can participate in harmful systems without seeing themselves as bad. The uncomfortable truth is this: most people are not immune to the influence of power. The most important question raised by this experiment is not about the guards or the prisoners. It is about us. If you had been there, would you have acted differently? Or would the role you were given have changed you too? The Stanford Prison Experiment does not provide easy answers, but it forces us to reflect on how fragile morality can be when systems, authority, and power take control. If you found this story interesting, this channel is made for you. Here, we explore real psychological experiments, historical events, and human behavior through calm storytelling and simple visuals. Not to shock, but to help us understand how people think, act, and change. New videos are uploaded regularly, each focusing on a single idea, explained clearly and thoughtfully. If you enjoy content that makes you pause, reflect, and ask deeper questions about human nature, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps the channel grow, and it allows more stories like this one to be told. Thank you for watching and for spending these minutes thinking with me.